My name is Elias Vance, and for most of my life, I have been a student of quiet things. As a child, I was drawn not to the boisterous clamor of neighborhood games, but to the intricate patterns of frost on a windowpane, the silent drift of pollen on a sunbeam, the slow, patient crawl of a snail across a whetstone. This inclination for the subtle and the overlooked eventually shaped my career. I founded and now run a company called Viridian Grove, where we design immersive digital landscapes serene, explorable worlds of impossible forests and tranquil, starlit shore for people seeking refuge from the noise of modern life. I build sanctuaries. It is, perhaps, a fitting profession for someone who has so often felt the need for one. My own sanctuary has always been elusive, particularly within the geography of my own family. My parents, Eleanor and Richard, and my older siblings, Clara and Leo, operate on a different frequency. Theirs is a world of bold pronouncements, of tangible achievements, of a love that is often loud but rarely deep. I have spent the better part of 3 decades trying to translate my quiet language into their boisterous dialect, hoping that one day they might finally understand me. This hope, a persistent, foolish little wildflower growing in the cracks of my heart, is what led me to Crest Fall Bay. It was a place my mother often spoke of with a wistful sigh, a small town on the Oregon coast where she and my father had spent their honeymoon. She would describe the scent of the salt-laced pines and the ceaseless, meditative rhythm of the waves. I imagined that if I could bring them back there, to the origin point of their shared life, the nostalgic air might act as a balm, softening the calloused edges of our relationships. So, I orchestrated it all. I found a sprawling, cedar-shingled house perched on a cliff overlooking the churning Pacific, a place with enough rooms for everyone and a great stone hearth that smelled of wood smoke and thyme. I paid for the flights, the rental, the groceries. I even commissioned a local caterer for a grand reunion dinner, a meal I envisioned as a turning point, a celebration not just of family, but of a new, unspoken understanding. The culmination of this hope, the centerpiece of my grand gesture, was a set of leather-bound portfolios resting in my suitcase upstairs. Inside each was a future I had carefully built for them, a testament to the success I had quietly cultivated while they were busy looking the other way. I suppose, in the end, they gave me a testament of their own. The air in the dining room was thick with the scent of roasted rosemary and garlic, mingling with the damp, earthy fragrance of the coastal evening drifting through an open window. A fire crackled in the hearth, its flickering light dancing across the faces of my family. Leo was telling an animated, slightly exaggerated story about a mishap at work, and my mother's laughter, a familiar, bird-like trill, filled the space. My father, Richard, sat at the head of the table, a small, placid smile on his face, a look of benign contentment he wore like a well-loved sweater. Clara, ever the stylish one in a sharp, tailored blazer, sipped her wine and interjected with witty, cutting remarks that made Leo flush and my mother laugh even harder. For a moment, it was perfect. The scene was a painting I might have designed myself: family, contentment, hearth. I felt a warmth spread through my chest that had nothing to do with the fire. This was it. This was the feeling I had been chasing. All right, before dessert, we have one more little surprise," Clara announced, clapping her hands together with theatrical glee. She slid a large cardboard box onto the table. In honor of this amazing weekend that Elias so generously put together. She winked at me, and I felt a blush of pleasure. Maybe this was their thank you. Maybe they'd gotten me a gift, something to acknowledge the effort. Leo helped her unpack the box, pulling out stacks of neatly folded t-shirts in a soft, heather gray. He passed them around the table. My mother held hers up to her chest, admiring the simple, elegant font. My father chuckled, unfolding his. Clara handed me the last one with a flourish. "This one's special, just for you, Eli." I unfolded the fabric. Across the chest, in the same tasteful, minimalist font as the others, were 2 words: "The Dreamer." A profound silence fell over me, a quiet so deep it seemed to absorb all the sound in the room. The crackling of the fire, the distant roar of the ocean, the very beat of my own heart, it all receded. I stared at the words. The dreamer. It wasn't an insult, not in the way biggest disappointment might have been. It was something far more subtle, and in its subtlety, infinitely more wounding. It was the name they had given me in childhood. It was what my mother called me with a sigh when I showed her a drawing of a winged ship instead of my math homework. It was what my father would say with a shake of his head when I'd spend an afternoon lying in the grass, watching the clouds, instead of practicing baseball with Leo. It was Clara's go-to label for me, a neat little box in which to place every part of me she didn't understand or value, my quiet nature, my artistic pursuits, my tendency to see the world not for what it was, but for what it could be. To them, the dreamer was a synonym for impractical, for naive, for someone who lived with his head in the clouds, unmoored from the real and important business of the world. It was a gentle, smiling dismissal of my entire being. "It's perfect, isn't it?" Clara said, her voice bright with a laughter that didn't reach her eyes. "It's so you." Leo snorted, pulling his own shirt over his head. His Reed the Charmer. Clara's was the boss. My mother's, the heart, and my father's, the rock. They were all archetypes of strength, of action, of social grace. And then there was me. The outlier. The one who wasn't grounded in their reality. My mother gave a soft, apologetic laugh. "Oh, Clara. It's a bit on the nose, isn't it?" But there was no heat in her words, no defense of me. It was the kind of gentle chiding one uses for a clever, mischievous child. My father just smiled, that same placid smile, and nodded slowly. "Fits," he said, a single word that landed like a stone. I looked down at the shirt in my hands, the soft cotton a dead weight. I thought of the millions of dollars my dreaming had generated. I thought of the company I had built from nothing, an idea born from those same afternoons spent watching clouds. I thought of the meticulously planned trust, the deed to a new life, the clean slates I was about to offer them, all tucked away in the portfolios upstairs. I had brought them tangible proof of what my dreams could build, and in return, they handed me a caricature of the boy they refused to let me outgrow. The warmth in my chest had turned to ice. It wasn't anger, not the hot, explosive kind. It was a cold, quiet clarity. The kind that comes when a fever breaks. The wildflower of hope in my heart finally withered, its roots exposed and starved of light. I realized, with a sadness so profound it felt like a physical ache, that I had not brought them here to a place of new beginnings. I had only brought them to a more scenic location to perform the same old play. My hands were perfectly steady as I folded the t-shirt with meticulous care and placed it beside my untouched plate of food. I pushed my chair back slowly, the sound of its legs scraping against the old wooden floor unnaturally loud in my internal silence. "I'll be right back," I said, my voice even and calm. I even managed a small, tight smile. "Forgot something upstairs." No one tried to stop me. They were already busy taking a group photo, holding up their wine glasses, their new identities proudly displayed on their chests. A perfect family portrait, with one conspicuous, empty chair. Upstairs, in the cool silence of my room, the scent of the sea was stronger. I opened my suitcase and lifted out the 4 leather portfolios. They were heavy, bound in a deep forest green that reminded me of the digital woods I created. The paper inside was thick and creamy, the kind used for archival documents, meant to last for generations. For my parents, there was the Eleanor and Richard Legacy Trust. It contained documents confirming the complete, anonymous payoff of their mortgage, alongside a structured retirement fund that would grant them an annual income generous enough for them to travel, to pursue hobbies, to live out their years without a single financial worry. I had even included brochures for a world cruise my mother had once wistfully mentioned. For Clara, who constantly complained about being trapped in a small condo in a city she loathed, there was a portfolio containing the deed to a beautiful 4-bedroom house in a quiet, leafy suburb, the very one she'd once shown me online, calling it her impossible dream house. The down payment was covered in full, and a trust was established to assist with the mortgage for the first 5 years, giving her and her family the financial breathing room to truly settle in. And for Leo, my charming, perpetually struggling brother, I had created the Leo Vance Endeavor Fund. It was a seed investment for any business idea he wanted to pursue, but it came with a condition. He had to work with a financial advisor and a business mentor, both of whom I had already retained and paid for. It wasn't a handout, it was a structured opportunity, a chance for him to finally succeed on his own terms, but with a safety net built by a brother who believed in his potential even when he squandered it. I ran my thumb over the embossed gold lettering on the cover of the top portfolio. I had imagined this moment so many times. The tears in my mother's eyes. The stunned, respectful silence from my father. Clara's disbelief melting into gratitude. Leo's boisterous hug, one of genuine, unadulterated joy. I had envisioned a moment of profound, life-altering connection, the final, undeniable translation of my quiet love into their language of grand gestures. Holding the portfolios now, they felt like relics from a different life, artifacts of a faith I no longer possessed. My dreams for them, printed and bound. I walked back down the stairs, my footsteps echoing in the hallway. The laughter from the dining room had resumed. They hadn't even noticed I was gone for so long. I stopped in the doorway, just watching them for a moment. They were a closed circle, complete and content without me. I walked to my empty seat. I placed the 4 portfolios on the table with a soft thud. Clara looked up, her eyebrow arched. "What's all that?" "More presents." "In a way," I said softly. Then, one by one, I opened the portfolios. I took out the first stack of paper, the trust for my parents. The thick, creamy pages felt sacred in my hands. I looked at my mother, at my father. Their faces held a mild curiosity, nothing more. I held the stack firmly, and with a clean, deliberate motion, I ripped it in half. The sound was sharp, violent in the convivial atmosphere. A tearing of paper that felt like the tearing of flesh. Leo stopped laughing. "Eli? What the hell are you doing?" I didn't answer. I reached for Clara's portfolio. I pulled out the deed to her dream house, the legal documents, the financial statements. I looked at her, her face a mask of confusion and burgeoning anger. I ripped them in half too. The sound echoed the first. "Elias, stop it," my mother cried, her voice rising in alarm. "What has gotten into you?" My father was halfway out of his chair. "Son, that's enough." I picked up the last portfolio, the fund for Leo. He just stared at me, his mouth agape. I tore those pages too. The room was now utterly silent, save for the crackling of the fire and the roar of the ocean outside. I neatly stacked the 2 piles of shredded documents on my dinner plate, a monument to a future that would never be. Then I picked up the gray t-shirt. I held it up for them to see. "You were right," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "It is perfect." I let it drop onto the pile of ruined dreams. "Enjoy the rest of the weekend," I said. "It's all paid for." I turned and walked away. I didn't run. I didn't slam the door. I just walked, the sound of my shoes on the wooden floor marking a slow, steady retreat. I opened the front door and stepped out into the cool, misty night. The salt spray on my face felt like a baptism. It wasn't an act of anger. It was an act of surrender. Not to them, but to the truth. A quiet kind of freedom. I was halfway to my car when my phone began to vibrate. It was Clara. I let it go to voicemail. A moment later, another call. Leo. Then my mother. The calls came one after another, a frantic, desperate cascade. They must have finally picked up the pieces, read the letterheads, understood what they were looking at. I sat in my car, the engine off, and watched the fog swirl in my headlights. The silence in the car was a blessing. The boy who had so desperately wanted to be seen by his family had just made himself invisible. And for the first time in my life, it felt like the most powerful thing I had ever done. The drive back to Portland was a long, dark ribbon of road unwinding through a landscape of sleeping giants, the ancient pines and firs of the Oregon coastal range. The rhythmic sweep of the windshield wipers clearing the persistent drizzle was the only percussion to the symphony of thoughts in my head. The initial feeling of liberation, that clean, sharp break, was slowly being replaced by a deeper, more complex emotion. It wasn't regret. It was grief. I was mourning a family I had only ever been able to have in my imagination. I thought of my childhood, a collage of quiet moments set against a backdrop of boisterous family life. I remembered being 8 years old, spending an entire summer building a detailed model of a fantasy city in our basement, complete with miniature paper lanterns and a river made of blue yarn. When I finally showed it to my family, Leo accidentally crushed a tower while chasing the cat, and Clara remarked that it was a weird way for a boy to spend his summer. My mother, trying to be kind, suggested I might like to join a soccer team instead, to get some fresh air. The message was always the same. What I valued was strange. What I created was insignificant. At 17, when I told them I wanted to study digital art and interactive design, my father sat me down for a serious talk. He spoke of pensions, of stable careers, of the importance of a real job. He wasn't unkind, but his words were heavy with a disappointment he tried to frame as fatherly concern. "That's a nice hobby, Elias," he'd said, "but it's not a life." They helped Clara with a down payment on her first condo, fresh out of her business degree. They co-signed a significant loan for Leo to start a t-shirt printing business that failed within a year. For me, there was only a handshake and a wish of good luck. So I did it alone. I worked 3 jobs while in college, sleeping in 4-hour shifts. I built the first prototype of Viridian Grove in my cramped dorm room, fueled by cheap coffee and a burning need to prove that the worlds inside my head were real, that they had value. When my company finally secured its first round of major funding, I didn't tell them. When we turned a profit, I stayed silent. The success felt too fragile, too personal. It was a language I had learned on my own, and I feared they would only misinterpret it, either by dismissing it as a fluke or, worse, by trying to claim a part of it, rewriting history to cast themselves as the supportive family who had always believed in the dreamer. But love, even a strained and conditional love, has a powerful gravity. I saw them struggling. I saw my parents worrying about their thinning retirement savings. I saw Clara, trapped in a life that was smaller than her ambitions. I saw Leo, bouncing from one gig to another, his charm wearing thin against the harsh realities of debt. And so, I started helping. An anonymous wire transfer to their bank account, timed to look like a tax refund. A scholarship that appeared out of nowhere to pay for my niece's expensive private school. A debt forgiveness letter from a credit card company, which I had secretly paid off for Leo. I was the ghost in their machine, the silent benefactor, the dreamer building them a reality they could live in, all from the shadows. The reunion at Crest Fall Bay was meant to be my emergence from those shadows. Not to gloat, but to finally be present in their lives, to offer my help not as a secret, but as a gift from a son and a brother. I wanted them to see me Elias, not the caricature they had created. But they had held that caricature up and laughed. And in that moment, I understood that my anonymity hadn't just been a shield for my own feelings, it had been a convenience for them. It allowed them to accept the help without having to acknowledge the source. Acknowledging me would have meant acknowledging they were wrong. My phone buzzed again, pulling me from my reverie. It was a text from a cousin, Amelia. "Hey, Clara just posted something really weird on Instagram. Are you okay?" My heart sank. I knew what this was. This was the next move in the play, narrative control. I pulled over at a rest stop, the air thick with the smell of wet asphalt and pine. I opened the app. There it was, a beautifully filtered photo of the family at the dinner table, taken before my departure. They were all smiling, raising their glasses. The empty chair where I had sat was just out of frame. The caption read, "Family is complicated. Sometimes the people you love the most are fighting battles you can't understand. Sending love out to anyone who is struggling. Remember to be kind." It was brilliant in its passive-aggressive cruelty. Vague enough to be deniable, but pointed enough for anyone who knew our family to understand the implication. I was the one who was struggling. I was the one having a breakdown. The comments were already pouring in. "Thinking of you, see. So true, you guys have such a big heart. Family can be tough. You're handling it with such grace. She had preemptively framed my departure not as a reaction to their cruelty, but as an act of my own instability. They weren't the problem, my mental state was. Then came a text from Leo. Dude. Seriously. A public meltdown? You embarrassed all of us. After we tried so hard to include you. Include me. He wrote that as if the T-shirt, the culmination of a lifetime of being othered, was an act of inclusion. A wave of cold, crystalline anger washed over me, displacing the grief. It was the quiet, focused anger of a designer finding a fatal flaw in a system. Their system was flawed. Their narrative was a lie. And for 20 years, I had quietly allowed them to write it. No more. I took a deep breath, the damp coastal air steadying me. I didn't want revenge. Revenge was their language, loud, messy, and ultimately unproductive. I wanted something cleaner. I wanted the truth. I scrolled through my contacts and found the number for Anya Sharma, the journalist who had been working on a feature about Viridian Grove for a prestigious design and culture magazine, Aesthetica. The article was supposed to run in 2 months. It was a deep dive into the philosophy behind my work, the intersection of technology and tranquility. We had spoken for hours about my creative process, my inspirations. I had, in a moment of vulnerability, even told her a little about my family, about feeling like an outsider, though I had asked her to keep it off the record. I dialed her number. She picked up on the second ring, her voice warm and professional. Elias. Late night for you. Everything all right? Hi, Anya. I'm okay. Listen, I have a strange request, I said, my voice even. That feature you're writing. I was wondering if we could add a new angle to it. Oh? I'm listening. I'd like to go on the record about my family, I said. All of it. And I have some documents I can send you. Scans of them anyway. The originals are no longer available. There was a pause on the other end of the line. I could almost hear the gears turning in her journalistic mind. Elias, she said carefully, are you sure about that? I've never been more sure of anything in my life, I replied. I think it's time people understood what it really takes to build a sanctuary. In the days that followed, I existed in a state of strange suspension. My apartment in Portland, usually a haven of minimalist calm, felt like a waiting room. My family's calls and texts had become a relentless barrage. My mother left long, tearful voicemails, oscillating between confusion and accusation. I don't understand why you would do this. Elias, we love you, this isn't you. My father sent a single, terse text. Your mother is devastated. You need to call us. Clara, having received no response to her social media performance, resorted to direct, venomous emails, accusing me of being selfish, ungrateful, and mentally unstable. I didn't reply to any of them. Instead, I methodically forwarded every message, every voicemail transcript to Anya. I also sent her the scanned copies of the portfolio, the trust deeds, the financial plans, the title to the house along with bank statements showing the years of anonymous support. I gave her everything. It was like lancing a wound that had been festering for years. Painful, but clean. 2 weeks later, the article was published online. Anya had titled it, The Architect of Quiet Worlds. It was a masterful piece of journalism, weaving the story of Viridian Grove's success with the deeply personal narrative I had shared. It opened with a description of the serene digital landscapes I created, then pivoted beautifully. But the piece Vance engineers for millions, Anya wrote, was born from a lifetime of searching for his own. She laid out the facts with journalistic precision, but also with profound empathy. She detailed the years of quiet financial support I had provided, juxtaposing it with the family's perception of me as the dreamer. She included an anonymized but unmistakable description of the reunion, the T-shirts, and the final, quiet act of severance. The centerpiece of the online edition was a high-resolution gallery of the scanned documents I had torn: the trust for my parents, the house for Clara, the fund for Leo, each page a testament to a generosity that had been met with ridicule. The article didn't paint my family as monsters. It did something far more devastating. It painted them as they were: flawed, blind, and tragically unaware of the gift they had been given and had so carelessly thrown away. Anya concluded the piece with a quote from me, one I had given her on that long, dark drive back from the coast. "You can't build a home on a foundation of misunderstanding," I had told her. Sometimes, the most loving thing you can do is to stop trying and simply build a sanctuary for yourself. The fallout was immediate and seismic. The article was shared thousands of times within the first few hours. My world, which had always been small and private, was suddenly very public. The first wave of messages was from friends and colleagues, expressing shock and support. But then came the second wave, from a place I never expected. Distant relatives, old family friends, people from my hometown, they all reached out. A second cousin wrote, "Elias, I'm so sorry. I always felt they treated you differently, but I never said anything. I'm ashamed of that now." An old neighbor sent an email. "I remember your mother once telling me you were her sensitive one, and she said it with a sigh, as if it were an affliction. I'm so glad you showed them the strength in that sensitivity." The narrative they had so carefully controlled for decades had been dismantled in a single day, not by my anger, but by the quiet weight of the truth. My family's reaction was one of pure panic. Clara's Instagram went private. Leo deleted his social media accounts entirely. They tried to do damage control, of course. I heard through the grapevine that my mother was calling relatives, claiming the article was full of horrible lies and that I had been manipulated by a vulture journalist. Clara tried to tell mutual friends that I had always been prone to exaggeration and that the money was an attempt to control them. But it didn't work. The evidence was too clear, too comprehensive. The documents didn't lie. The bank statements didn't lie. And for the first time, people were seeing my side of the story not as an emotional outburst, but as a documented history. The community they had relied on to validate their version of reality was now looking at them with questioning eyes. The most profound silence came from my father. He didn't call. He didn't text. He didn't email. His absence was a void, and I didn't know what it meant. A week after the article was published, a package arrived at my apartment. It was a small, heavy box with no return address, but the postmark was from Crest Fall Bay. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, was the great stone I had admired from the hearth of the rental house, the one that was shaped vaguely like the state of Oregon. Beneath it was a single sheet of paper, folded once. It was a note from my father. His handwriting was a familiar, rigid cursive. The note was short. "Elias," it read. "I read the article. All of it. I looked at the papers you sent. We sat in that house for 2 days after you left. In the quiet. I had forgotten how quiet it could be. I am sorry. For not seeing. Dad. For not seeing." Tears streamed down my face, hot and silent. It wasn't an apology for the jokes, or the t-shirt, or the years of dismissal. It was an apology for something deeper, for a blindness he had finally acknowledged. It wasn't a resolution. It wasn't a promise that things would be different. It was just a beginning. A crack in the stone wall of his silence. I placed the stone on my windowsill, where it would catch the morning light. It was a heavy, solid thing. A piece of the place where everything had fallen apart and where, perhaps, something new and more honest had just begun to be built. The grief was still there, but it was different now. It was the clean, quiet sorrow that comes after a storm has passed, leaving the air washed clean and the world smelling of rain and new earth. I had lost a family, yes, but I was finally, truly building a home. 2 years passed. 2 years of quiet, steady reconstruction. The world, after the initial furor of the article, moved on, as it always does. For me, that quiet was a gift. It allowed me to focus on my work, on my own life, on tending to the fragile new growth in the space where my family used to be. Viridian Grove flourished. The story, paradoxically, had imbued my work with a new layer of authenticity. People weren't just buying a product, they were connecting with the philosophy behind it. I used a portion of the profits to launch the Sanctuary Grant, a foundation that funds artists, writers, and designers whose work is unconventional, who have been told their dreams are impractical. My first recipient was a young woman from rural Appalachia who built breathtaking sculptures out of discarded scrap metal. Seeing her work displayed in a gallery for the first time felt more rewarding than any financial milestone. I heard about my family in fragments through the occasional, hesitant update from my cousin Amelia. Clara and her husband divorced. Apparently, the public exposure had fractured an already fragile union. She sold her condo and moved to a smaller town, seeking anonymity. Leo, stripped of his financial safety net, had to get a steady job. He was working for a logistics company, and Amelia said that for the first time, he seemed grounded. My mother had thrown herself into volunteering at her local church, finding a new community to nurture her. They never reached out to me directly, and I never reached out to them. The space between us was vast and silent, filled with unspoken words and the ghost of what might have been. My father's note remained the final communication, a solitary bridge over a wide canyon. I didn't know if we would ever cross it, but it was enough to know that it was there. One crisp autumn afternoon, I was at the dedication ceremony for a new project, a collaboration between Viridian Grove and the city of Portland. We had transformed a derelict downtown lot into a real, physical public gardena, pocket park, designed with the same principles of tranquility as our digital worlds. It had meandering paths, native plants, and secluded benches where people could sit and find a moment of peace amidst the urban chaos. As the small crowd mingled after the speeches, a young woman with bright, intelligent eyes approached me. She looked to be in her late 20s, holding a sketchbook to her chest like a shield. "Excuse me," she said, her voice a little shy. "Are you Elias Vance?" I smiled. "I am. I wanted to thank you," she said, her gaze earnest. "I read that article about you in Aesthetica a couple of years ago. My family, they're a lot like yours. I'm a painter, and to them, that's the same as being a professional daydreamer." She took a deep breath. I was about to give up. I was going to enroll in a paralegal course. "But I read your story. I read about how you built a world from your dreams, and how you had the strength to walk away when your own family tried to tear it down. It gave me the courage to not give up. I moved out, got a studio with 2 other artists, and I'm having my first small gallery show next month." She looked down at her scuffed boots, then back up at me, a watery shimmer in her eyes. "You showed me that my dreams weren't the problem. The dismissal of them was. So, thank you. You have no idea what that meant to me." I was speechless. All the accolades, all the financial success, all the public validation, none of it landed with the force of this young woman's words. I had spent so long trying to win the approval of 4 people who were incapable of giving it, never realizing that the story of my struggle might become a source of strength for countless others I would never even meet. In that moment, standing in the real-world sanctuary I had helped create, I finally understood. The T-shirt hadn't been a curse. It had been an accidental prophecy. They had called me the dreamer, and they were right. I had dreamed of a family that could love me for who I was. And when that dream proved impossible, I had learned to dream of a life where I could love myself. I dreamed of a world where quiet strength was recognized, where sanctuaries could be built in the most broken of places. And standing there in the cool autumn air, surrounded by the gentle rustle of leaves and the quiet hum of the city, I realized my dream had, in its own unexpected way, come true. The family I had yearned for wasn't one of blood, but one of spirit, a scattered tribe of fellow dreamers, finding the courage to build their own worlds, one quiet, defiant act of creation at a time. The reconciliation I had sought was not with them, but with myself. And the feeling was not one of victory, but of a deep, abiding, and hard-won peace.